The moment my stepfather, Robert Vance, took the microphone at my wedding reception, my chest tightened. He was already unsteady, bourbon glass empty, smile sharp in a way that made my skin prickle. I told myself it was just nerves, that he would offer something polite and sit down. I was wrong. That day was supposed to be the beginning of my life with Liam. The room was full of laughter, soft music, and people who had traveled far to celebrate us. I remember thinking how proud my mother would have been. She had passed away 3 years earlier, and Robert had sworn at her bedside that he would look after me like his own. I believed him. I had trusted him with my future. Robert cleared his throat and began talking without warning. At first, people laughed politely, expecting a light joke. Then his words turned sharp. He spoke about my mother in a way that made the air go cold, bringing up her private struggles as if they were entertainment. He hinted that caring for me had been a burden he carried out of obligation, not love. Each sentence felt like a slap, delivered slowly so everyone could watch. I stood frozen, my hands shaking, hearing whispers spread across the room. Liam reached for me, but I could barely feel his touch. Robert went on, louder now, announcing that the money he had promised for the wedding was a mistake. He said my marriage was a childish dream, something that would fail the moment real life arrived. Faces turned toward me, some confused, some embarrassed, some cruelly curious. Then he said it. He looked straight at me and told me to get out. The room went silent, as if the music had been ripped from the walls. In that moment, something inside me broke and hardened at the same time. I felt humiliation burn through my chest, but I also felt a strange clarity. I stepped forward and took the microphone from his hand. My voice shook, but I spoke anyway. I thanked everyone for coming and told them I hoped they would still enjoy the evening. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I turned and walked out, my wedding dress brushing past stunned guests. Liam followed without hesitation, his hand firm in mine. As the doors closed behind us, I realized I had just lost the man who claimed to be my family. But I had also learned the truth in the most public way possible. What was meant to destroy me marked the moment I stopped being small. We were supposed to be on a beach in Hawaii, learning how to breathe again as a married couple. Instead, we stayed inside our small apartment with the curtains half closed, the suitcases still packed by the door. I moved through the days like a shadow, doing simple things slowly, as if my body hadn't caught up with what had happened. Liam never left my side. He cooked, cleaned, and held me when the nights felt too long. He never once asked me to explain or defend myself. Not everyone was so kind. Liam's mother, Eleanor, called once. Her voice was polite but distant, filled with careful words that hid judgment. She said the wedding incident had raised concerns and hinted that drama followed me wherever I went. I understood what she meant. In her world, reputation mattered more than truth. I ended the call early and didn't answer when she tried again. One afternoon, needing something familiar, I opened the old boxes I had brought from my mother's house years ago. I hadn't touched them since the funeral. The smell of old paper and cedar filled the room. I sat on the floor and began sorting without thinking, my hands moving while my mind stayed quiet. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to feel close to her. That's when I saw it. A thick envelope, tucked between books, sealed and clean, as if it had been placed there on purpose. My name was written across the front in my mother's neat, careful handwriting. My heart started racing before I even opened it. Inside was a small brass key and a folded note. Her message was short but clear. She called me her clever girl and told me the truth was waiting in a cedar box. She warned me not to trust anyone and to rely on my own judgment. The date at the bottom was only days before she died. My hands trembled as I read it again and again. For the first time since the wedding, the heaviness in my chest shifted. This wasn't comfort, and it wasn't closure. It was direction. My mother hadn't left me empty-handed. She had left me something hidden, something important, and she believed I was strong enough to find it. I looked at Liam and showed him the note. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and said we would figure it out together. In that quiet room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, my sadness slowly turned into focus. Whatever waited in that cedar box was meant for me, and I knew then that I wasn't done yet. The key led me to a quiet bank across town, the kind of place people visit for serious reasons and leave without stories to tell. I stood in line trying to keep my breathing steady, telling myself this was just another errand. Still, my palms were damp as I signed my name and followed the clerk into a small private room. When the metal box slid onto the table, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to close it and walk away. Opening it meant changing everything. I turned the key and lifted the lid. Inside were neatly stacked papers, a worn notebook, and another envelope. Everything was arranged carefully, just like my mother used to do. I opened the envelope first. It held a legal document, clear and formal. As I read, my stomach tightened. This was her real will. It stated that everything she owned, including her company, Ether Innovations, would legally become mine when I turned 30. That was only 8 months away. Until then, no one had the right to control or sell anything in her name. I kept reading, confusion turning into anger. After her death, Robert had shown me a different document, claiming it was her final wish. That version placed all authority in his hands, supposedly for my benefit. Sitting there in that small room, I finally understood the lie. He had planned this long before I was ready to question him. The notebook filled in the rest. Page after page, my mother had written her worries in calm, careful words. She suspected money was being moved without approval. She had noticed accounts that didn't balance and decisions she never agreed to. Tucked inside was a ledger. I didn't need to be an expert to see the pattern. Large amounts were disappearing, redirected again and again for personal use. I felt sick, not just from the theft, but from how close it had all been. The company I grew up around, the work my mother poured her life into, had been treated like a private wallet, and I had been kept in the dark on purpose. As I closed the box, something became clear. This wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. My mother had seen the danger and prepared for it quietly. She hadn't warned me with fear or anger. She had left proof, knowing the truth would protect me better than promises ever could. I walked out of the bank with steady steps. What I carried wasn't just paperwork. It was the truth, carefully saved for the moment I was strong enough to face it. I knew I couldn't handle what I'd found on my own. The papers were clear, but power rarely gives itself up without a fight. I needed someone who understood the system and wasn't afraid of it. One name kept coming back to me, mentioned often by my mother in quiet conversations I never fully noticed at the time. Hazel Finch's office was nothing like the polished buildings Robert preferred. It was small, crowded with books, and smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Hazel herself looked sharp and alert despite her age. When I told her who I was, she didn't seem surprised. She nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting me for a long time. She listened without interrupting as I explained everything. When I finished, she leaned back and said my mother had prepared carefully. She told me she had always suspected something was wrong, but needed solid proof before acting. That was why she stayed ready, waiting for the moment I would come looking for answers. That was when she introduced me to her paralegal, Dax. He was younger than I expected, and unusually tense. After a moment of hesitation, he told me the truth. He was related to the woman Robert had been showing off lately, the one who appeared everywhere wearing expensive clothes and jewelry. Dax didn't hide his dislike for Robert. He said he had seen firsthand how money changed people and how lies followed it. For months, Dax had been quietly passing information to Hazel. He confirmed what the documents suggested. Company funds were being used for private trips, gifts, and rent on places that had nothing to do with business. The spending had increased fast, reckless, and obvious to anyone who knew where to look. I felt anger rise, but Hazel stayed calm. She explained that this kind of behavior often came from panic. People who believed they were untouchable started making mistakes. Every mistake left a trail. By the end of the meeting, I understood something important. I wasn't walking into this alone. Hazel had knowledge, experience, and patience. Dax had access and reasons of his own. Together, they formed something I hadn't expected to find so soon. As I left the office, the weight I had been carrying felt lighter. I still had a long road ahead, but now I had guidance and information from the inside. For the first time, the situation didn't feel impossible. It felt manageable. Once the work began, the truth came out faster than I expected. Hazel and Dax moved carefully, checking records piece by piece, following money trails that had been hidden under layers of paperwork. What started as a single lie slowly opened into something much larger and far more disturbing. The damage reached beyond me. Money meant to protect my relatives had been quietly pulled away. Accounts connected to my aunt were nearly empty, drained through deals she barely understood. Savings set aside for my cousin's future had been redirected into places they never agreed to. Each discovery felt heavier than the last. This wasn't careless behavior. It was planned and repeated. The company itself had been used as security for risky decisions made in secret. Valuable ideas that were meant to grow the business had been tied to personal debt. If even one loan failed, everything could collapse. Hazel explained how dangerous that was. The structure holding it all together depended on no one asking the right questions. Dax helped connect the timing. As spending increased, control tightened. Records were delayed. Meetings cancelled. Explanations rushed. The closer things came to falling apart, the louder Robert became in public. It made sense in a cold, uncomfortable way. Fear often looks like confidence when seen from the outside. I sat through these updates trying to keep my emotions in check. Anger would have been easy, but understanding mattered more. The picture forming wasn't about greed alone. It was about desperation. Every move had been made to stay ahead of exposure, to keep the illusion alive just a little longer. Hazel said something that stayed with me. She explained that people who build on stolen ground are always watching for cracks. They push others down so no one looks too closely at the foundation. The more I thought about it, the clearer everything became. What happened at my wedding wasn't random or impulsive. It was a distraction. A loud scene designed to shift attention, to paint me as unstable so questions would stop. The cruelty had a purpose, and that knowledge changed how I saw it. The humiliation was meant to protect him, not destroy me. By the time we finished reviewing the evidence, there was no confusion left. The image Robert had built around himself depended entirely on lies and borrowed time. One strong push in the right place would be enough to bring it down. I left that meeting steady and focused. What once felt personal now felt necessary. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. We agreed that speed mattered, but noise did not. Everything had to be done by the book, clean and calm, without giving any warning. Hazel reminded me that the strongest moves are often the quietest ones, the kind that unfold before anyone realizes what is happening. The first step was securing what legally belonged to my mother. With Hazel's guidance, I submitted the required filings to protect her work and clearly state my claim. It was a careful process, full of forms and deadlines, but every signature felt grounding. This was about restoring order, not creating chaos. At the same time, Hazel reached out to financial institutions connected to questionable deals. Her letters were firm and precise, leaving no room for misunderstanding. They didn't accuse anyone loudly, but they demanded attention. The effect was immediate. Silence from the other side suddenly turned into requests for clarification and delays. Dax brought critical timing into focus. He learned that a major agreement was close to being finalized, one that required complete transparency and legal certainty. Any unresolved issue, even a small one, could stop it entirely. That knowledge changed everything. We didn't rush or celebrate. We simply adjusted our position. Information was shared carefully and without names attached. Oversight bodies were made aware that ownership questions existed and needed review. At the same time, industry rivals were alerted that the situation wasn't as solid as it appeared. No accusations were shouted. We let procedures do the work. Within days, movement slowed. Decisions were postponed. Conversations became cautious. The structure that had once seemed confident started hesitating, and hesitation in that world was costly. Hazel explained that when systems designed to prevent risk sense uncertainty, they freeze first and ask questions later. I stayed in the background through all of it. This wasn't about being seen. It was about setting boundaries where none had existed before. Every step followed the law exactly as written. That mattered more than emotion or anger. Watching it unfold felt strange. I wasn't celebrating, but I wasn't afraid either. The pieces were finally aligned in a way that made sense. Nothing was forced. Nothing was rushed. By the end of the week, the pressure was no longer on me. It had shifted completely. All we had done was tell the truth in the right places and let the system respond. The shift happened fast. What once looked solid began to wobble, and then everything started breaking at the same time. Plans that had been moving forward without question were suddenly paused. Meetings were cancelled. Decisions were pushed back with no new dates. The confidence that surrounded Robert vanished almost overnight. Money became the first pressure point. Institutions that had been patient before now wanted answers. Lines of credit tightened. Agreements were reviewed again and again. When trust disappeared, support followed it out the door. People who once returned his calls immediately now sent formal emails instead. Someone he had relied on for years stepped away and chose self-preservation. Long-buried documents surfaced, detailed and damaging, tracing patterns that could no longer be denied. Hazel reviewed them carefully and confirmed what they showed. This wasn't a misunderstanding or poor management. It was systematic deception, recorded in his own numbers. Inside his offices, fear took over. Staff members were dismissed without warning. Loyal workers who had stayed through difficult times were accused of betrayal. The atmosphere became tense and unstable. No one knew who would be blamed next. Productivity collapsed as panic replaced routine. At the same time, his personal life began to unravel. The lifestyle that had drawn certain people close became impossible to maintain. Promises turned into excuses. Plans were cancelled. When the flow of money slowed, commitment disappeared with it. The apartment that once hosted loud celebrations went quiet within days. Before leaving, one final truth slipped out. In a moment of frustration and confidence, words were spoken that could not be taken back. Dax captured them without interruption, letting the silence do the work. The recording didn't need commentary. It spoke clearly on its own. I watched all of this from a distance. There was no satisfaction in seeing it fall apart so completely. What I felt instead was relief. The strain that had followed me for years finally lifted. The confusion made sense now. Hazel reminded me that collapses don't come from one push. They happen when weight builds up and support gives way. The structure had been weak long before I touched it. By the end of that stretch of days, nothing was holding together anymore. The image was gone, replaced by facts that refused to stay hidden. The truth had done exactly what it always does when given space. The call came late in the evening. His voice was loud, rushed, and full of false concern. He said the family needed to meet and clear the air. He claimed he was worried about my state of mind and wanted everyone together to help me see reason. I agreed without arguing. There was no point in refusing. Everything he needed to hear was already prepared. I arrived at my mother's house with Hazel, not alone. The living room was crowded with familiar faces, all sitting stiffly, unsure why they had been summoned. My aunt looked tired and confused. My cousins avoided eye contact. Liam's mother was there too, her expression tight with expectation, as if she had come to witness proof of my failure. Robert started speaking before anyone else could. He paced the room, painting himself as calm and patient while suggesting I was confused and reckless. He spoke slowly, choosing words meant to sound caring. I let him finish. When he finally stopped, the room felt heavy and tense. I stepped forward and placed the folder on the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt. I simply opened it and began explaining what each document showed. Dates, signatures, numbers. Clear comparisons that required no interpretation. I passed copies around so everyone could see for themselves. When the analysis of the altered documents was revealed, the mood shifted. When the financial records were laid out, silence followed. I watched my aunt's hands tremble as she recognized her own information. The truth reached her before my words did. Then, the recording played. The room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. The excuses stopped forming on Robert's face because there was nothing left to hide behind. His anger turned into fear, raw and exposed. Questions came quickly after that, sharp and direct. He tried to explain, then tried to blame, but no one was listening anymore. Years of trust collapsed in minutes. Liam's mother stood up last. Her voice was cold but controlled. She said she had misjudged me and allowed herself to be misled. She looked directly at Robert and told him he was harmful to everyone he touched. Then she apologized to me without hesitation. No one defended him. No one followed when he stormed out. The room didn't feel victorious, just clear. I gathered the folder and closed it quietly. As I left the house, I felt steady. The truth had been spoken in full light, and it no longer belonged only to me. After that night, things moved into places I couldn't control, and for once, that worked in my favor. Everything shifted from private pain to public process. Paperwork replaced arguments. Silence replaced threats. The truth no longer needed my voice to survive. Officials handled what came next. Questions were asked, records reviewed, timelines rebuilt. Each step confirmed what had already been exposed. There were no clever explanations left, no way to smooth over what had been done. The facts stood on their own, steady and undeniable. The legal process was slow but firm. Every hearing peeled back another layer, showing patterns instead of excuses. Hazel kept me grounded, reminding me that justice rarely arrives with drama. It comes through patience and proof. When the final decisions were read, there was no surprise, only relief. Control returned to where it belonged. What had been taken was formally restored. The house felt different after that, quieter and lighter, as if the walls themselves could finally breathe. I walked through familiar rooms without feeling watched or measured. For the first time, it felt like a place of safety instead of tension. One night, Long after everything seemed settled, chaos tried to return. A loud noise at the door jolted me awake. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. By morning, it was over. Cameras don't argue, and truth doesn't stumble when it's recorded clearly. The last attempt to reclaim power ended not with shouting, but with flashing lights and closed doors. When it came time for final judgment, I sat quietly, hands folded, listening. The room was calm. The words spoken were measured, careful, and final. Responsibility was named. Harm was acknowledged. Character was not assumed, but demonstrated through action. I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. Walking out of the building that day, the weight I had carried for years finally lifted. Not because someone else fell, but because I no longer had to stand beneath their shadow. The future didn't feel sharp or uncertain anymore. It felt open. I went home, took off my shoes, and sat by the window as the evening settled in. The noise was gone. What remained was mine again, not just in name, but in truth. With Robert finally behind bars, the weight that had pressed on my life for years began to lift. I walked into Ether Innovations with steady steps, no fear, no doubt. For the first time, the office felt like it belonged to me, not just in title, but in purpose. Every decision, every plan, was mine to make. Dax was by my side, ready for the challenge. His insight into the company's inner workings and loyalty to truth made him the perfect partner. Together, we rebuilt trust within the team, clarified responsibilities, and began reshaping the business that had been tangled in deception for so long. Slowly, the operation stabilized, and confidence returned. The Department of Defense contract, once at risk, became ours. With clear ownership and verified patents, we secured it legally and professionally. There were no shortcuts, no hidden tricks, just skill, persistence, and the integrity my mother had instilled in me. Seeing the project move forward under our control felt like a quiet victory, one built on competence rather than fear or manipulation. At home, life began to heal in its own way. Liam and I finally celebrated properly, surrounded by people who truly cared for us, free of judgment and tension. The wedding reception we had missed months ago became a joyful event, full of laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the chaos that had once overshadowed our day. It was a reminder that love and support could endure even the darkest storms. In the company lobby, I returned my mother's portrait to its rightful place. Looking at her face, I felt a deep connection, not just to the woman she had been, but to the legacy she fought to protect. Everything she had built, almost taken away, was thriving again. Robert's actions had cost him everything, but they also revealed my own strength. I didn't just reclaim what was mine. I stepped into my full potential, proving to myself that no betrayal could define me. The life I had now was real, earned through resilience and careful planning. Sitting in my office, watching the team move confidently and the company grow, I realized that the ashes left behind weren't just destruction, they were a foundation. What he tried to ruin became my path forward. My mother's vision, combined with the strength I discovered in myself, was no longer threatened. It was thriving. Do you think I handled my stepfather the right way by standing up to him and taking control? Or should I have tried to forgive him? Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear what you think.